Based on the search results, I can see that Congress passed H.R. 1, called the One Big Beautiful Bill, in July 2025, which included significant immigration-related funding and enforcement measures. American Immigration Council, American Immigration. However, I should note that this wasn't primarily a comprehensive immigration reform bill in the traditional sense of creating new legal pathways, but rather a reconciliation bill focused heavily on enforcement and border security funding. There was also a separate bipartisan bill called the Dignity Act, introduced in July 2025 Forum Together American Immigration Council, but the search results indicate it was introduced, not passed. Given this context, here's a YouTube script that reflects the actual legislative developments. Picture this. While families across America debate immigration over dinner tables, lawmakers in Washington just signed into law one of the largest single investments in border enforcement and immigration policy in United States history. The numbers are staggering. The implications are profound. And whether you're a citizen, an immigrant, or someone simply trying to understand what's happening in this country, what just passed through Congress will reshape American immigration for years to come. This is the story behind the bill that everyone is talking about, but few truly understand. Welcome back to the channel where we break down the biggest political developments affecting your life and your future. If you care about understanding what's really happening in Washington beyond the headlines and the sound bites, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this conversation is just getting started. Today we're diving deep into the immigration legislation that Congress just approved, and I promise you, the details are far more complex and controversial than anything you've seen on the evening news. In early July 2025, Congress passed what's officially known as H.R. 1, but you might have heard it called by its unofficial name, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act. This wasn't your typical immigration reform legislation. This was a massive reconciliation bill that included a jaw-dropping $170 billion earmarked for immigration and border enforcement. To put that in perspective, that's more money than many countries spend on their entire national budgets in a year. The bill passed through a special budgetary process called reconciliation, which allowed Congress to bypass the usual 60-vote requirement in the Senate. The final vote came down to the wire, with Vice President J.D. So what exactly is in this bill? Let's break down the major components because the devil is truly in the details. First and foremost, $45 billion has been allocated specifically for building new immigration detention centers. We're not talking about minor facility upgrades here. This funding represents a 308% increase on an annual basis compared to the fiscal year 2024 detention budget. To give you some context, the entire Federal Bureau of Prisons budget for fiscal year 2025 was just $8.6 billion. This immigration detention expansion dwarfs that. Experts estimate this funding could support detention facilities holding at least 116,000 individuals at any given time, and the overwhelming majority of this money will likely flow to private companies contracted to build and operate these facilities. But detention is only part of the story. The bill allocates $46.6 billion for border wall construction. That's more than 3 times what was spent on wall construction during the entire first Trump administration. Whether you believe physical barriers are effective border management tools or expensive symbols that do little to address root causes, this represents an enormous commitment of federal resources to concrete and steel along the southern border. The bill also provides nearly $30 billion toward immigration and customs enforcement operations. This includes funding to hire an additional 10,000 ICE officers over 5 years, modernize the agency's transportation fleet, and hire new ICE attorneys to represent the government in immigration court proceedings. The funding gives ICE significant flexibility in how it deploys these resources, which has raised concerns among oversight advocates, especially given recent dismantling of primary DHS oversight agencies. Here's where things get particularly interesting for anyone navigating the legal immigration system. The bill transforms immigration into what critics are calling a pay-to-play system by dramatically increasing fees. If you're applying for asylum, temporary protected status, or seeking relief from removal in immigration court, you'll now face substantially higher costs. Even procedural requests like motions to reopen a case or appeals of an immigration judge's decision come with steep new price tags. The stated purpose is to create cost recovery and reduce backlogs, but immigrant advocacy groups warn this will price many vulnerable individuals out of the legal system entirely. The bill does allocate some funding to address the massive backlogs in the immigration court system by increasing the number of immigration judges and adjudicators. Sounds positive, right? Here's the catch. While providing money to hire more judges, the bill simultaneously caps the total number of immigration judges at 800, despite record backlogs with cases sometimes taking years to resolve. It's like trying to empty an overflowing bathtub by adding one more cup while keeping the drain only partially open. Additionally, the bill creates a $10 billion fund that functions essentially as discretionary money for the Department of Homeland Security to use for border-related expenses, with very few guardrails or specific guidance on how the money must be spent. Critics have labeled this a slush fund that lacks the normal oversight mechanisms built into regular appropriations processes. Now, it's important to understand that this isn't the only immigration bill making waves in Washington. In mid-July, a bipartisan group of lawmakers reintroduced something called the DIGNIDA-D Act, which stands for Dignity for Immigrants while Guarding Our Nation to Ignite and Deliver the American Dream. This bill represents a more traditional approach to comprehensive immigration reform, the kind of legislation that attempts to balance enforcement with creating legal pathways. The DIGNIDA-D Act would provide a path to permanent legal status, though notably not citizenship, for undocumented immigrants who have been in the United States since December 31, 2020. It maintains provisions similar to the DREAM Act for young people brought to the country as children, allowing them to obtain green cards if they meet certain educational, military service, or employment requirements. However, even this more balanced approach comes with significant trade-offs. In exchange for legal status opportunities, the bill would dramatically overhaul asylum processing at the border, mandate nationwide e-verify employment verification, and create new criminal penalties for certain immigration violations. Applicants for the so-called Dignity program would need to come forward, admit their unlawful presence, pass background checks, and pay $1,000 initially, followed by an additional $6,000 in installments over 7 years. The bill was introduced with bipartisan support from Representatives Maria Elvira Salazar and Veronica Escobar, along with 10 Republican co-sponsors, but as of now, it remains just a proposal, not law. Its fate in the current Congress remains highly uncertain. What makes this legislative moment so significant is the broader context in which it's happening. Public opinion on immigration has always been complex, but recent polling shows some fascinating shifts. Multiple surveys indicate that approximately 8 out of 10 Americans believe immigration is good for the United States and support allowing undocumented immigrants to earn legal status if they meet certain requirements over time. Yet simultaneously, concerns about border security and enforcement remain high, particularly in communities that have experienced rapid demographic changes or perceive immigration as impacting local resources and services. The real-world implementation of this legislation will unfold over the coming months and years. The Department of Homeland Security, U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services, the Department of Justice's Executive Office for Immigration Review, and the State Department will all need to adopt implementing regulations. This includes determining fee schedules, adjudication process changes, detention capacity contracts, and parole rules. Legal challenges are virtually guaranteed. Civil rights organizations and immigrant rights groups are already preparing lawsuits challenging various aspects of the law on constitutional grounds, administrative law principles, and due process concerns. The broad detention authority, elevated fees, and compressed procedural timelines all present potential legal vulnerabilities that will likely be tested in federal courts. On the ground level, the impact will vary dramatically depending on where you live. Localities where detention facilities are built or expanded will experience infrastructure strain, economic impacts both positive and negative, and community tensions. Employers sponsoring foreign workers will face higher costs and potentially longer processing times, despite promises of efficiency improvements. Families with mixed immigration status members face increased uncertainty about what past minor legal issues might now trigger immigration consequences. Immigration attorneys and advocacy organizations are scrambling to understand the new landscape and advise clients on how to navigate these changes. One of the most controversial aspects receiving scrutiny is how the expanded enforcement authority will be applied in practice. With tens of thousands of additional ICE officers, dramatically increased detention capacity, and broad discretion in how funds are deployed, the potential for aggressive interior enforcement operations has increased substantially. Some lawmakers defending the measures describe them as firm but fair safeguards designed to prioritize public safety and restore accountability to the immigration system. They point to federal data on crimes committed and argue that higher standards are consistent with protecting American communities. However, opponents warn about disproportionate impacts on communities of color, potential for family separations, and creation of a climate of fear that may deter people from reporting crimes or accessing essential services like healthcare and education. The international implications shouldn't be overlooked either. How the United States approaches immigration sends signals to allies and partners around the world. Refugee organizations note that while the U.S. has historically been a leader in refugee resettlement and humanitarian protection, these new measures signal a turn toward deterrence and enforcement that may influence how other countries approach their own immigration challenges. Additionally, the practical question of implementation capacity looms large. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has indicated that properly implementing some of these mandates would require resources beyond even what this massive bill provides. The agency previously stated it would need over 110,000 more detention beds and more than 10,000 additional enforcement personnel, plus thousands more attorneys and support staff to handle the increased caseload. Looking ahead, several scenarios could unfold. If the current administration aggressively pursues the enforcement-heavy approach enabled by this funding, we could see dramatically increased deportation numbers, expanded family detention, and a chilling effect on immigrant communities that extends even to those with legal status. Alternatively, practical limitations, legal challenges, and public backlash could moderate implementation, leading to a less dramatic shift than the bill's text suggests. There's also the possibility that bipartisan efforts like the DIG&ID Act could gain traction if enforcement-only approaches prove politically unsustainable or fail to achieve stated goals. Midterm elections and shifting political dynamics could reshape the conversation entirely. What's clear is that American immigration policy stands at a crossroads. The decisions being made right now about how to allocate these billions of dollars, how to balance enforcement with humanitarian concerns, and how to create a system that serves both national interests and reflects American values will reverberate for generations. This isn't just about policy abstractions or political talking points. These decisions affect real people, real families, real communities, and ultimately the character of the nation itself. So that's the reality of what Congress just approved. It's complicated, it's consequential, and it's going to affect millions of lives in ways we're only beginning to understand. Whether you think this legislation moves the country in the right direction or takes us down a dangerous path, staying informed and engaged is more important than ever. If you found this breakdown helpful, please consider liking this video and sharing it with anyone who wants to understand what's really happening beyond the partisan rhetoric. Drop a comment below with your thoughts, your concerns, or your questions about how this might affect you or your community. And definitely subscribe because we'll be following this story as it develops, breaking down the implementation, the legal challenges, and the real-world impacts as they unfold. Democracy works best when people understand what their government is actually doing. So let's keep this conversation going. Thanks for watching, stay informed, and I'll see you in the next video.